Hey guys, it's Caleb Guilliams here with BetterWealth. In today's video, we're going to be breaking down all the ins and outs of an IUL and what you need to know. I'm here with my good friend Chris Kirkpatrick with LIFE180, and Chris is by far one of the gurus out there teaching people all they need to know about IUL, and you're biased.
I am.
And so I just want everyone to know that there is a bias against IUL for what Chris is about to share with you. And so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna be watching as well, commenting, and the purpose, again, of this whole channel is to create content that will help you be more intentional with your money. And so with that, why don't you introduce this and break this down?
Yeah, so I thought it would be fun. Caleb and I were just talking, and I thought it would be really fun and beneficial for everybody to really understand the moving parts, the mechanisms of Index Universal Life. He said, I'm biased, I used to be the head of business development for the top IUL company in the country. I had to stop because I learned all these components, right? And it's actually kind of gotten a little bit worse since I left the industry on the IUL side of things. And I'm just really passionate about what life insurance can do for people if it's utilized the proper way. I guess the context of this, I think it's important to know, I get the reputation, I think, of being like the biggest IUL hater in the world. Is that fair?
Well, you have the IUL Challenge.
I have the IUL Challenge, which, you know, I've got some videos on that, but basically the IUL Challenge says, hey, we just came through the greatest bull run in the history of the world, and you're gonna find out why the IUL Challenge exists based on the information that I'm about to give you. But the bottom line is, with the way they're sold with the upside potential and downside protection, that upside potential is sold like, hey, you're participating in the index. Well, we just had the greatest bull run decade in the history of those indexes, yet IULs still didn't perform. And to prove it, because I know they didn't and people are saying they did. Now, I'm not saying they couldn't have. I'm saying 99.9% of them haven't. And so with that said, I created this challenge. I've got over 100,000 views on all the different platforms of the videos pushing the IUL Challenge on multiple channels, and not one person has been able to show me an in-force illustration matched the original illustration. They've always performed worse. So I'm gonna show you here on as to why that's the case. I think it will start to make sense. And I think while, you know, a lot of people think I hate IUL, I don't hate IUL. I hate the way that it's sold. I hate the way that it's misrepresented. I do believe it has its place. And so let's just get into this. So I'm gonna talk to you because it's more fun rather than preaching. It's more fun to talk to you, right? So do you know exactly how life insurance companies participate in the index?
Yes.
You do?
Do you want me to try to explain it?
Yeah, I'd love it.
Okay.
I'd love it.
So essentially what they do is they take the interest that in a whole life company or a carrier would just pay you as a dividend, or as a UL carrier would just pay you interest. What they're doing is they're buying a call option that is essentially says, hey, if the index goes up a certain amount, that's why there's a cap, we're going to credit that. So we're going to exercise the call option and get that. But if it doesn't perform, if it goes below whatever, they're just not going to, the call option just expires and they don't. So that's how they use options to get the upside and limit the downside.
Love it. So here, let me put some numbers to that, okay? So basically, let's just assume after everything's said and done, your policy has $10,000 of cash value, okay? So what's gonna happen is the life insurance, what he said, they know, the general fund, they know that they're gonna get, let's say 4%, okay?
Yep.
So they know that your policy is gonna earn $400, okay? 4% of 10,000 is 400 bucks. So what this $400 is, this is what they create the options budget with, right? So this $400 is the options budget. And so then what happens, they say, okay, we're gonna take that $400 and we're gonna go buy options. So what will happen is, as Caleb said, if this right here, so when we talk about over the last decade, when I first started selling IUL in 2009, okay, cap rates were 16.5%.
That's insane.
No joke, at that point in time, we were told that we were being conservative running them at 9.1% assumptions. Like, and so looking back, you know, that's obviously insane. By 2011, they were down to 14%, right? And then by 2015, they were down to like 12%. And now in 2022, we're talking between 9 and 10%, right? So the last decade, this is important context to understand as to why IULs haven't performed the way that they're sold. And this is one of the reasons I created the challenge. So one of the greatest ways IUL companies have ultimately over the past decade or more, since 2009, have really reduced their performance is they've reduced the cap rates, right? And so I'm gonna get into that. Why do they do that? Why do they have to reduce the cap rate, right? Because a lot of people think, well, the market's done really well. Shouldn't the policy perform well? No, because the cap rates get reduced. The cap rate, if you're not aware, that's the most that you can earn in the policy. Like back then you could earn up to 16.5%. Floor of 0, that still exists. But if I sold it to you in 2009 with a 16.5% cap rate, we were illustrating because of a high cap rate at 9.1%, being told that was conservative. And then, today, if you had that same policy, by the way, it's 9 to 10% on new business. But here's the other thing about IULs that I can't stand. They have new business and they have old business. On these old policies, what happens is, let's say it was generation 1 IUL, and then generation 2 came out in 3 and 4 and 5 and 6. Like I just did a review the other day on the Pac Life Accumulator 6. It was the 6th generation of the Pac Life Accumulator, right? Generation 6 comes out and they got a 10% cap rate. That's new business. All these insurance companies utilize high cap rates, high performance in the first couple of years to buy business, to attract business, and it illustrates well. These policies, I've seen illustrations at 6.75%.
So what you're saying
rates.
is they're dropping it like after they illustrate, as the years go on, they're dropping it significantly.
As the surrender period goes on, the cap rates get reduced. But here's the crazy part. This old policy will get reduced to a lower number, but then they'll take new business and they'll market at a higher number.
Why do you think that is? Because I think that's criminal, quite frankly.
It should be, honestly.
Because it's just dishonest.
It's completely dishonest. Yeah.
Okay. So is there anything that a company can get? Do they have a floor on how far they can drop the cap rate?
Yeah, 3%.
3%.
Well, and that's for most companies. It can go to 2% in some. Most companies have a floor of 3%, which is what? The equivalent of a traditional universal life.
Yeah.
Effectively, right?
And ultimately, that's insane. So do you want to go back to why the cap rate?
So the cap rate gets reduced because of these two things. So like what has happened over the past decade?
Interest rates have decreased.
Interest rates.
And by the way, it's the only metric really that matters with this because it's how much they can get on their general fund so that they can put it into an option trade.
Interest rates, this general fund is created by the fixed market, right? Yep. So interest rates have gone down. So there's two things that lead to the performance of an IUL. Interest rates.
And volatility.
Options costs.
Yeah.
i.e. volatility. The higher the volatility, higher the options cost, and higher the competition.
Correct.
Right? So it's been the perfect storm for IULs. In the greatest bull run in the history of the market, they've had to reduce cap rates so people haven't been able to participate in that full upside because their performance of the general fund, so their options budget has gone down and their options costs have gone up, right? Now, this is why, and I got to do this because I can't help myself because I am biased, but I gotta do this. This is why I tell people, I'm a big believer that I think, listen, there's no guarantees, so like I want to make that totally transparent and clear. I'm a big believer whole life could possibly outperform the illustrations that we're seeing right now because they are just the fixed market, and the whole life is what impacts the dividend rate. So as the general fund performance starts getting better, dividend rates have a greater potential of getting increased. Fair enough?
Fair enough.
Okay.
Yep.
In an IUL, it may increase their options budget, but the other thing that happened in the last decade is there's been more competition in the IUL market, right? And so therefore, that's also driven options because it's supply and demand. Right.
And which should, but also could be good because it keeps these people honest. This is what's crazy to me, Chris. This actually is something that we should camp out longer, maybe not in this video, but the fact that companies can drop this lower than what they're, that's criminal.
I saw somebody sent me a Midland National IUL policy statement the other day. 7.5% cap rate, and they bought it 4 years ago with a 12% cap rate.
And what were they advertising this year?
10.
So that like, right there, it's
I mean,
that's insane.
Because they create new generation products.
But
when you create a new generation product, And this is where I think regulators got it wrong, and I believe they're gonna catch up with it, right? Like they have to.
Yeah.
They have to. And so, but the thing is, as they release these new products, there is no requirement for the insurance company, once they release Generation 2 product, let's just say it was Generation 2 in 2011, and they reduce the cap rate here to 14%, they could have reduced the 16.5% to 12% while the new business was 14%, and they don't have to advertise it to anybody. The only thing they have to do is send a letter to the policyholder. So they have to do that, but let's face it, the policyholders have no idea what they're reading in those policy statements.
Advisors have no idea what
Exactly, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So like, that's the problem, right?
That's fascinating.
And so,
I knew this because we've chatted, but this right here is insane.
To see it, right?
There should be we should do another video on this. But
I have a policy statement. I'm gonna redact some information and share it because it's mind-numbing. So cap rates go down. So here's the thing. It's important to understand. Okay, so I'm going to get into details with this a little bit. So that's good to know. So what happens is let's take an index for an example, okay? Because let's do a little deep dive here, right? So what happens is we have you buy an IUL, you participate in an index. Let's just call it the S&P 500, because that, to me, if you're going to do one. Well, I'll get into it more later, but always do the major index because it's got the history, it's not proprietary, it's not going to have a lot of manipulation going on to it.
It's also going to be one of the lowest cost.
It's going to be the lowest cost, all that. Actually, that's not the case anymore.
Okay.
Because they created these proprietary indexes to reduce the cost because there's no competition for it. So, but you want to do this. So what's going to happen is based on this options budget and the options costs and all that stuff, they're going to say, we're going to give you, let's just call it a 10% cap rate, with maybe, let's just call it 100% participation rate. I'm gonna call it par rate, right? So what happens is though, as they write that cap, you have to look at the illustration because they can say 3% guarantee, right? And then they go, for the par rate, maybe it's 50% guarantee. I'm just giving examples, right?
Yeah.
So this is what the
Can you explain par rate in a second for people?
Yep. So I'll do it right now.
Yep.
So a participation rate is saying if the market does 10% and you got a 10% cap, that means you can earn up to 10%. If the S&P earns 10% or 15%, you're going to get 10%, right? At 100% participation rate means you're going to get 100% of the 10%. Some policies will have 125% par rate, right? So if that's the case, you're going to get 12.5% on the 10%, right?
Is that the case, or is it you don't need quite 10% to get the cap?
No, you get 12.5%.
Okay.
Yep. So you would get whatever that so that's fine, right? But this is what the last decade looked like.
Can they change the par rate as well?
Yeah, the company it can go down to 50%.
Meaning if you have a cap of 10, you can only earn 5.
If they reduced it to 50. So this is the thing. The insurance company has all these levers. This is a lever.
Chris, what if the S&P did 20%? Can you still get to 10?
So if the S&P did 10, typically these are two levers. This is like a traditional IUL, okay? Yep. So it would have a cap rate and a par rate, right? And so they probably wouldn't change both of these at the same time. Yep. Is really what is likely what normally would happen is they would go, we're going to go down to 9.5%, right? That's they do that, and then they go to 9%, right? Which is what a lot of companies have done recently. There's even a couple companies that have gone down to 8.5%, right? So that's the case. But let's say they didn't want to do the cap rate, right? So what they would do instead is they would say, we're going to keep our cap rates at 10, but instead we're going to drop the participation rate to 80%. What is that? That's effectively like reducing this to 8%. Because if it does 10%, you're getting 80% of that, which is 8%. Which is crazy, though, in most of these policies, they can reduce the participation rate and the cap rate. And if you did both, it's travesty, right? Now, that's that. So we have to realize they have all these moving levers. So I have the cap rate, participation rate, spread charges, cost of insurance can change.
What's the difference between spread charges and cost of insurance?
So spread charges are something new that they've created for uncapped rates. So when Regulation AG 49A came out in 2020, companies came out with two things. Well, they didn't come out with them, but they became way more popular and designed differently, right? So they came out with two things. So number one is proprietary indexes. And then they came out with no cap indexes. Okay? So what they would do is they would say, they're going to create their own, like, Nationwide came out with their own, like, Zebra Edge, just as an example. I'm just going to use that. That's at the top of my mind, right? So the Zebra Edge index, which, by the way, they got rid of subsequently. And in the illustration, when you read, I just went through one the other day, when you read that, they say in there, on any annual policy date, we have the right to basically stop this performance and force you into a different index.
Yep. They just have a lot more control.
They have all the control, right? Not you. The no cap indexes, this is where the spread charge comes in. So let's just go to the S&P 500 as an example. What's scary is a lot of people use proprietary indexes and then do the no cap, right?
Okay. But no cap sounds good, right?
No cap sounds great because what happens is a lot of people over COVID, when the market tanked, March of 2020, and then all the way to April 2021, if you look at that, the market was like up 60%. So if we had a no cap, right, with a 7.5% spread charge, and the market went up 60%, and that was your point-to-point time, I could illustrate for you how you made like 52.5%, for instance, right? Your IUL earned 52.5%. Do you ever see any marketing around that?
I saw, yes.
That's why, because of these. But here's the deal. You can't sell somebody on an idea with a product that you got to think really long-term with these and then say, hey, look what you did this year. Like you got to think long-term, right? And that's where all these components come into it. So what we have here, let's just call it the S&P 500 again, right? And what they would do is they'd say no cap and a 7.5% spread charge. I'm just going to write spread. What they do here, though, is they say, I'm just going to give an example of this, not specific product, but let's just say 20% because I've seen this. 20% guaranteed. So meaning, this is what happens. If the S&P earns 10%, you only get 2.5% credit in your account because the first 7.5% goes to the company. And they have the contractual right to make it so the first 20% performance of the S&P goes to cover the cost of the options in the index, right? Like, because that's it.
It's interesting.
Right? So here's what I go to show everybody. This is so vital to understand. What's important to understand. Let's just use this as an example, okay? So up here we got a 10%, 100%, 10% cap, 100% participation rate. We're with the S&P 500, okay? Down here we have S&P 500, no cap, 7.5% spread. At the end of the day, what is the commonality with this and this product?
There's a lot of moving parts, and all those moving parts are not in your control.
Okay, so that's one, and I wasn't thinking that, but that's really good. I like where your head's at. But the real technical commonalities, because I'm trying to be fair and super hyper analytical for people to understand how these things really work. The one commonality in this is we got the S&P 500. Okay, so we're utilizing in these examples the S&P 500 index. Okay, what are we doing with that? How are we participating in that index? We're participating with an options budget, an options cost, right? Those two variables going into the same index. So no matter what, the performance long-term is going to have to be the same because we're dealing with the same variables on the top end. The input is the same options budget, the same options cost. So it doesn't matter if there's no cap or if there's this. At the end of the day, they're going to move whatever lever, spread charge, whatever, long-term. These policies, I got news for you, are going to perform identical pretty much.
You know what's interesting?
All smoke and mirrors.
You know what's interesting? What if they gave you the option to put more money out of your own pocket into the option to give you more upside? Because at the end of the day, a lot of these people are right is if these things do perform, it's in a tax-free wrapper because it's life insurance. But the reality is what you're pointing out is there's so many moving pieces. I'm still caught up on Chris on this because this kind of is depressing because it doesn't even matter what the illustration's saying if they can just mark you down below while also advertising to the new customers coming in. Like that fundamentally doesn't sit well with me.
It doesn't sit well with me.
But it just shows you if they can do this and there's so many variables that can change. At the end of the day, majority of people aren't even structuring these things.
Properly.
And they have no clue what they're doing.
Totally.
And I don't know if we want to even do a deeper dive on option A versus option B. Like, I don't know if that's a whole other video.
Yeah, it's probably a different video because I mean, I literally could talk about this for 3 hours.
Yeah, we know.
What we're looking at here though, so we've covered the cap rate. This is something that is going to get moved, right?
Yeah.
The participation rate can get moved. We have spread charges that can get moved no matter what. Now, what's happened here, it's important to understand, they created these cap rates and eliminated, or they created the no cap product. And you notice what's not on here? A participation rate. Because over a decade, they built a reputation saying, well, all these companies, people like me out there saying, they just reduce the cap rates and they reduce the participation rate, so they're dangerous. So now they came out and they go, well, we're going to get rid of that argument. We're going to create a no cap product and we're going to eliminate the no participation rate. We're just going to add this new thing in. This was like a new concept a couple of years ago.
Yeah, it's just another way of saying par rate.
Yeah. Like they have all these different ways. I even saw a Pac Life product the other day where they guarantee 15%, they guarantee 100% participation rate with a 15% cap, but then they have another mechanism which is, I can't remember what they call it, but it was effectively like a multiplier.
Right.
And it's a 1.15%, but they can drop the multiplier down to 60% which by the way, if you go 15 times 0.6, it goes to like 8%.
Yeah.
You know? So
do you think over time, properly structured whole life policy will outperform a properly structured IUL policy? When it comes to cash on cash?
That's a tough one. That's a tough one. Okay. My personal belief is yes.
Because some people, and I'm just playing devil's advocate, some people could say, okay, this is terrifying. It's like, if you're anything like me, you're like, it doesn't 100% make sense, which I don't think I think majority of people, if they're being honest, even selling this, they don't fully understand this. But over time, their whole deal is, whole life is sometimes a black box. They're not always super transparent in all these things. Ooh. And so, just hear me out here. So over time, over 30 years, which is going to perform better? And my whole deal is, I don't want to put my money in risk of something that's out of my control, because this doesn't come across as a safe asset to me. Whereas whole life would.
You don't put your money into a policy like this to take risk, right? That is, most people buy these because of the upside potential, downside protection. You can never lose your money to market loss, but you can lose your money. Look at like I always tell people, when you look at these policy illustrations, don't look at the current, don't look at the guaranteed, because I don't think that's ever going to come into play either. I don't think it's a fair, like there's a lot of people that are out there that are whole life people that hate IUL and don't really educate themselves enough. And they're like, look at the guarantees. It's like, if we're having that conversation, we're all in a lot of trouble, right? Like, I mean, like realistically speaking, what do I think is going to happen? I think whole life has a potential to outperform. I think IUL, we talk about compounding. When they don't perform the right way, when the caps get lowered more, when the illustrative rates don't get met after a 10-year period, you're talking compounding starts working against you, because everything in the illustration is based on a consistent level of performance in the policy. And as soon as if it doesn't start off right, and that's the thing, I did an interview with Bobby Samuelson, I love it, and I did a little TikTok clip on this because like I took it out of the video because it was hilarious. And he's like, effectively, IUL agents are the equivalent of lottery ticket winners, right? Like, imagine you have a buddy that wins a lottery, right? And he goes, look at me, I'm the best lottery ticket picker ever. I just won the lottery. You should give me your money to buy lottery tickets. That's how good I am, right? No, that makes no sense. That's how lucky the index universal life industry on its own has been, because they haven't performed in the greatest bull run. And so what's it going to look like when the market doesn't do well, right? And cap rates keep going down, options costs keep going up. Cost of insurance, that's the other component to this, right? The cost of insurance here can get really, really expensive. It's annual renewable term. The company doesn't have to raise the cost of insurance. I had a class action lawsuit attorney reach out to me the other day, and he was talking to me about Midland National actually is sending letters to their IUL policy buyers from 2007 or 8 that they just actually are getting a cost of insurance notice in the mail increase for their IULs, right? So that's another thing, right? And so like that can happen, but even if not, if the policy doesn't perform, the cost of insurance is gonna go up because the net amount at risk is higher. And I got news for you. If you're 70 and the difference between having 250,000 of net at risk versus 100,000 net at risk, it's a massive deal as far as the amount of money you're paying, right? And guess what? that's what happens if these don't perform.
Right.
And then that cost compounds against you. Right? And so that happens. And then, and then the general fund performance. So these are all things that impact the performance of the policy. And you need to understand cap rate, par rate, spread charges, cost of insurance, options cost, the general fund performance. These are all the variables that, by the way, you as the policyholder have no control of. Oh, and the other thing I was going to say, you were talking about like whole life, people making comments about it being a black box.
Right.
Whole life isn't transparent. They don't tell you what the fees are. They don't do this. I can look at an insurance illustration with a whole life policy, and I can look at the guaranteed column, and I go, best case, not even best case.
And you can run an IRR.
And I can run an IRR.
You can look at an actual internal rate of return, and you can run an IRR on guarantees, and look at the difference. So
and you and I always make the comment, what's the upside, what's the downside, can I live with the downside, right? Worst case scenario, if I'm selling you a policy, I could be like, Caleb, can you live with that? If the sky starts to fall, can you live with that? Right? And you're going to say yes or no. And
it's not going to blow up.
Exactly, right? And so when people are like, whole life's not transparent. Okay, but it is transparent because what you see is what you get. When IUL agents are like, well, why don't they show you the cost of insurance fees and all the admin fees and charges and all this stuff like we do in IUL? You know why they don't have to?
Right.
Because they're fixed. They don't change.
Right.
IULs have to show you, everybody, all these agents that are out there talking about how it's a benefit that they're transparent. No, it's not. They're having to show it because those are all fees the insurance company can increase on you. They have to be transparent. And they're not doing it to be transparent about the fees. They're doing it to be transparent about a little note in the top that says, we can increase these fees at any time. That's what it's all about. That's what it's all about. Not all the ledger of all the fees that you're paying. It's this little asterisk up here telling you, guess what? We're going to stick it to you at some point in time.